Okay, we're going to tackle the quadratic formula level 2. Now in 1a, it says use the quadratic formula to find the zeros of f of x equals 2x squared plus 10x plus 12. And notice that this is now just a little bit trickier because our a value is no longer a 1, it's now a 2. Okay, and so we can label our a, our b, and our c. And let's go ahead and write out our quadratic formula. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And from here, what we know is that when we want to use the quadratic formula, we're always going to take our letters and replace them with a set of parentheses. So these are all the things that we learned in our level 1 video. Everywhere I see a letter, I replace it with a set of parentheses. Now, let's kind of go back here and let's use a different color to denote this. So my a term is 2, my b term is 10, and my c term is 12. So let's plug them in. Where I have my b term, I have 10, and my next b term, I put a 10, and then I have an a term, and I can put that 2, and I know there's an a term right there, we'll put a 2, and lastly our c term is 12. And so let's kind of go ahead and start working through this and see what happens. So now we have x is equal to, and remember, what are the three words we use to determine how are we going to simplify this? Well, we have the outside, and a negative times a positive is, of course, a negative 10. Okay, and then we can write our formula plus or minus the square root of. And then the next thing we want to say is, well, we also have the inside of the square root. We have the inside. And so what is 10 squared? Well, 10 squared is basically saying 10 times 10. That is 100. I now look through my three terms and I see that there's one negative, and so I can say, well, one negative doesn't really change. And now we have 4 times 2, which is 8, and then we have 8 times 12. I would encourage you to use a calculator if you don't know your 12s, but 8 times 12 should be 96, and this, of course, is all over the simplification of the bottom. So remember, outside, inside, and then the bottom. And we know that 2 times 2 is in fact 4. Okay, so from here, the next thing we want to do is we want to simplify the inside again. So let's write that, inside again. And what in the world is that going to look like? Well, I bring this up and I write x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of something over 4. And it looks like 100 minus 96 would be 4. Now from here, remember, we want to simplify our square root, and we simplify that by clicking control and then x squared. If you push these two buttons, it will give you the little square root symbol. And when you do that, what you get is this. X is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 4 is in fact 2 over 4. And y'all, I'm moving a little bit fast through this, but remember, these are all the same steps that we did in our very first problem. And I just want you to notice that for the quadratic formula, the steps never change. This is why oftentimes students like it, because the steps are similar. Now, we know from here this divides into two different solutions. We have x equals negative 10, and we have the top part of that plus 2 over 4, comma, and we have negative 10, the bottom part of this, minus 2 over 4. The only thing that changes is there's a plus 2 and there's a minus 2. And when we go to simplify this, on the top we have negative 2 plus 10, which is negative 8 over 4, comma, and negative 10 minus 2, which is negative 12 over 4. And then let's just go ahead and simplify that. What does that equal? Well, we could say negative 2 over 4 is, we'll say x is equal to negative 2, comma, and negative 12 over 4 is negative 3. Okay, cool. So I would encourage you to pause the video, go back and rewatch any part of that you didn't understand. I went through it a little bit faster because we really took our time in the level 1 video. But we know that our zeros, our solutions, are negative 2, negative 3. And let's clean this up and see what it looks like. Okay, so we know that our solutions were the negative 2 and negative 3, and so I plotted them right here, our zeros, if you will. And I also know that my slope is my a value is a positive 2. Since it's positive, this graph opens up, and since 2 is greater than 1, it is vertically stretched, so we know that it's going to be a narrower or skinnier graph. Now from there, let's go ahead and look at part 1b. It says factor this function. So what would it look like to factor this? Well, I noticed that my a value is no longer 1, but 2, 10, and 12 can all be divided by 2. So let's do two things here. First things first, we know that whenever we're looking at the zeros of a quadratic function, this is where y is equal to 0, and f of x is another way of saying y. So let's set that equal to 0. And then we factor out that 2, alright, parentheses, and let's write everything here. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 1x squared. 10 divided by 2 is positive 5x. And 12 divided by 2 is 6. And from here, we can simply write this as 0 equals 2, parentheses, parentheses. And what does x squared break down into? Well, it breaks down into x and x. And we should know from our previous video that if I split up this 6, it splits up into 2 and 3, which add up to be 5. So remember, whenever you're factoring, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to be the last term and add to be the middle term. So we can write plus 2 and plus 3. And in order to solve for x, I take each factor and set it equal to 0. So x plus 2 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, minus 2, minus 2, minus 3, minus 3, and we get x equals negative 2, comma, and negative 3. And wait a second, those match my solutions over here. We have the same exact graph. So once again, if something can be factored, then that is oftentimes going to be easier than the quadratic formula. However, the quadratic formula always works and will give you the same answers factoring, but it works in cases where things cannot be factored. Alright, I'm going to do one more example, just in case you're struggling with this. Okay, so in this one, I kind of want to show you what the speed looks like when you get used to when you get used to using the quadratic formula. So let's kind of see, what would a problem look like when you are proficient with using it? Well, first we label our A, our B, and our C. And hopefully you're beginning to learn this by memory. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. Well, step 1. We then replace each letter with a set of parentheses. All over 2a. Okay. Oh, and let's just go ahead and plug in the things we know. We know that our a term is in fact negative 3, our b term is negative 18, and our c term is negative 24. So for our b term, we'll plug in our negative 18 and negative 18. And for our a term, we have this negative 3 and this negative 3. And lastly, our c term is negative 24. Okay. And these are big numbers. So if you want to use a calculator to make yourself feel confident, I would. But on the outside, a negative times a negative is a positive 18 plus or minus the square root of, if, and this is where you might make a mistake, if I put this as negative 18 squared in the calculator, it will give me negative 324. That is incorrect. To put this in the calculator, put in as parentheses negative 18 with the square on the outside, and that will give you positive 324. So that's very, very, very important. Now we've talked about counting up negatives, but notice here there's 1, 2, 3. A negative times a negative is a positive, but then a positive times a negative is still a negative. And let's work through this. We have 4 times 3, which is 12, and then we have 12 times 24. So let me go ahead and break out my calculator, because 12 times 24 is something I myself am unfamiliar with. 12 times 24. That's going to give us 288. And all of that is going to be over, let's use this funky yellow, 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. So remember, outside, inside, bottom. Okay, now from here, what would this look like to reduce everything or to simplify everything one more time? We had a of 18 plus or minus the square root of all over negative 6. And here we would look for what is 324 minus 288. And that's going to be 36. Now from here, we can go ahead and simplify this pretty quickly. Like if you know your square roots, this gets really easy. So I asked myself, well, what in the world is the square root of 36? So we have this, x is equal to 18 plus or minus, and the square root of 36 is 6, all over negative 6. Now when I split this, I get this, x equals 18 plus 6 over negative 6, comma, 18 minus 6 over negative 6, and then all we have to do is reduce. 18 plus 6 is going to be 24 over negative 6, and 18 minus 6 is going to be 12 over negative 6. And y'all are pretty good at these. So we know 24 divided by negative 6 is negative 4, comma, and 12 divided by negative 6 is negative 2. So wait a second. It looks like my zeros are at negative 4 and negative 2. And notice that that was pretty quick and pretty easy. So let's go ahead and look at the graph of this, because this one's actually going to be a little bit different. And then let's see what it would look like to factor it. Okay, so let's take a look here. We have our xy axis. We go to the left 1, 2, we'll put a point, and then 3, and then 4, and put a point. But notice here, something's different. Our a value is in fact negative. And so this vertex is actually going to be up here, and our function is going to open down. So remember, whenever your a value is negative, you actually have a reflection. And because our a value is greater than 1, because we could say that 3, remember we divorced the 3 from the negative, 3 is greater than 1, we know that it's a vertical stretch. Okay? And of course we can see that it's been shifted to the left and shifted up. Okay. What would this look like to factor? So let's set f of x equal to 0. And if I want to factor this, I have to recognize that my a value is not equal to 1. So my goal is to divide everything by my a value. And when I do that, I get this. I get 0 equals negative 3. It comes out to the front. And my leftovers are negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1x squared. Negative 18 divided by negative 3 is positive 6x. And negative 24 divided by negative 3, well, a negative divided by negative is once again a positive. 24 divided by 3 is 8. And at this point, we can see here that this actually splits up into two separate factors. X squared will break down into x times x. And we know that 8 really breaks down into 2 and 4. It also breaks down into 1 and 8, but I know that 2 plus 4 gives me 6. So x plus 2 and x plus 4. And in order to solve these, we set them both equal to 0. So remember, this part right here is essentially what you learned when you were solving quadratics with factoring. And from here I can do minus 2, and x is equal to negative 2. And minus 4, and x is equal to negative 4. Alright, and notice, hey, negative 2, negative 4, factoring gives us the same answer as the quadratic formula. Alright y'all, I hope that this video was helpful. In our next video, I'm going to cover one example and one example only, so make sure that you watch that one, otherwise you will be very, very lost. Alright, I'll see y'all in our level 3 video.